What's up guys, Chris here from the last checkpoint, bringing you video 8 of this Unity 3D game beginner series. This video is going to be all about the game over state or the restart state of our game. Right now, when I press play and you fall off the edge of our game board, you kind of just fall forever until you hit play again to stop the game. And then in order to restart the game, you press play. But of course, if we're going to go ahead and ship this game to someone to play, they won't have access to the Unity editor, and there's no real way to restart the game on their end. So, keeping the player in mind, we're going to go ahead and create the restart state for our game. Now, there's two ways I think our game should restart, and that's with any good game, that's a win state and a lose state. And I think we're going to go ahead and take one of the gems and just make it a little bigger, tag it a little differently so that it's recognized as a win state, and put it here, and that'll be our win state. And for our lose state, we're going to go ahead and put a platform right underneath our game board so that when our player object does fall off of the game board, we'll recognize that it hits the layer underneath the game board and recognizes that as a loss or a game over state. So we'll go ahead and start on our win state first. It'll look exactly like our gems, just a little bit bigger. So we'll go ahead and click our gem over here. This is gem 29. We'll double click this to focus on it. And we'll hit Control D to duplicate it. Go ahead and move it over to the center of the final platform here. And we'll go ahead and scale it to about 3 on the X, Y, and Z axes to make it a little bit bigger, but you can see that it's kind of stuck within the platform, which isn't good. So we'll go ahead and change the position to -8. -8 on the position of X, Y will go 5, and Z will go 120. And we raised it a little bit on the Y axis, but you can still see that it's still going into the platform a little bit because we want the player to collide with this and register a trigger event in order to trigger the win condition. So that'll be our win condition. Let's go ahead and call it such. We'll go ahead and call it WinGem. And we'll change the tag. So you can already see we have the tag win here, but you won't. This is just me playing around before doing the tutorial. You'll want to hit add tag. And then in this tags listing, you'll want to hit the plus button and then add the new tag of win. And while you're at it, you probably want to add the new tag of game over as well, because that's going to be the tag for our next object that we're going to put within the game. Let's go ahead and focus back on the WinGem. Everything here is exactly as it should be, except the tag needs to change to win, the win tag. And we'll go ahead and drag the WinGem into our prefabs so that we have it saved there. Great. Now we can hit the Y axis to look above our game. You can see it's a little off. So we'll go ahead and move it up just a little bit to 122 looks about right. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and create the game object that's going to sit underneath our game board in order to register the loss condition or register the fact that the player has fallen off the game board. So let's go ahead and go into game object, go to 3D object, and we'll make this a cube. Go ahead and reset its position. Now I've already toyed around with the position and the scale that is appropriate for my game for the purposes of timing on this video, but I definitely encourage you to play around with how large you want the platform underneath our game board to look. Well, you'll start to understand what I'm talking about here once we start creating it. So let's go ahead and call this game over. We'll go ahead and tag it with the game over tag that I had previously created and that you newly created. And like I said, I just so happen to know exactly where it should be. So let's go with 0 on the X position, -2.5 on the Y, and 50 on the Z. So you can kind of see that's in the middle of our game board here. And then rotation is fine. And then on the scale, go ahead and say 200 on the X, Y we'll leave alone, and Z, we're going to go ahead and go 400. You can see that encompasses our whole game board and then some. Now I overcompensated for the fact that if our player object is going full speed off of any area of our game board, that they'll still hit this game over object underneath the board regardless of how fast they're going. It's a really good idea to do that yourself depending on how big your game board is, because we want the game over game object to always be hit if the player falls off of the game board itself. You can kind of see some neat effects as you zoom in here. There's shadows that come from our game board onto the game over game object underneath, because that light that we always get initially. And there you go. Kind of a cool look that way. Now the game over board is going to be a trigger. So we'll go ahead and click is trigger here. That's it for our two objects. We'll go ahead and first drag game over into the prefabs. If I can get it there. One thing I want to do is give the game over game object a material, just so it's not so white in the background. Let's go ahead and go into our materials folder, right click create, go material, and we'll call this game over underscore map. And just like we did with our gems and platforms, go ahead and go to the albedo. Let's give this a nice light blue, kind of like water, I guess, is what I'm going for. Let's try that. Remember to drag it over our game board. That's still a little bright. Go back in. Take it down a little bit. I think that looks good right there. Go ahead and mix out there. And there you go. Control S to save. Now that we have our two game over objects, let's go ahead and go into the player controller and set our game up to actually reset when hitting one of these things. Let's go into the player controller, double click to enter it. Open up MonoDevelop. And so there's a couple of things that we need to take into consideration on resetting the game board. With the game objects that we already have, we obviously need to reset the count to 0 when we reset the game. We need to reset the player's rigid body back to its original position. And we also need to reset its velocity to a vector 3 of 0, 0, 0, because as it's falling, it'll obviously be at a moving pace. So we need to set it so that it's stationary. We also need to record the starting position of the player object so that when we reset the game, we can reset to the starting position. And the last thing I think we'll need is the actual gems objects, or a container of the gems objects. When we reset the game state, we want to go ahead and set all of the gems back to an active state of true, so that it restarts just as it does at the game's start. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but it'll become a little clearer as we start coding this out. So first things first, let's go ahead and set our variables. We have the player rigid body already and the count. Go ahead and create a private listing of our gems. We're going to go ahead and go private game object open close square brackets. Now, if you guys haven't seen this notation before, this just means we're denoting an array of whatever object that precedes the brackets. So it's an array of game objects. And an array is just a set list. So this is really just denoting that this is going to be a set list of game objects. And our set list of game objects is going to be the gems. So let's call it gems. We also need a vector 3 for our player's starting position. We'll go start position. And I think those are the only two new variables we need. So in our start method, we want to initialize both the gems list and the start position. So we'll go ahead and right after establishing the player rigid body, we'll go ahead and say gems equals game object. We're going to find all of the game objects with the tag of our gem. So quickly leaving here, let's go ahead and take a look at our gem object. We can see that our tag is gem. So we're going to look for all the objects with the tag of gem. So to do that, we say game object dot find game objects plural with tag. You can see there's a game object with tag, that just returns the one game object. If we're expecting multiple objects with the same tag, we want to use this plural one. Find game object with tag. And the parameter it's expecting is the string of the tag. So we know by looking previously, the tag we're looking for is gem. So now we've established what the gems are. We have them in this little container. And the second thing we want to initialize is the start position. So we'll say start position equals the player rigid body dot position. So this one's fairly easy. You can see it just returns the position of the rigid body. And that's how you initialize the container of gems and the start position. Now the next thing we want to do is kind of the same thing that we did with the gem object, where we found that our player had collided with the gem, and then we performed some code in order to increment the count or the score, and we updated the score text. We want to do the same thing with both the GameOver object and the WinGem. But instead of incrementing the count, we want to reset it back to a state of 0, as if the game is resetting. And we also want to reset the position and the velocity of the player back to where it started. So after this if statement, let's go ahead and do an else if. And this else if will say collider.gameObject.compareTag, find the win object, close paren, open close brackets. So if the collision is with the object with the tag win, let's go ahead and set the count to 0. And let's go ahead and update the score text. And let's go ahead and set player position and velocity to start. So let's say player rigid body dot position equals the position that we saved at the start, so start position. And then to reset the velocity, we say player rigid body dot velocity equals a vector3. Now we could do vector3 paren 0, 0, 0, but the object vector3 actually has a property of 0. So in the summary it says shorthand for writing vector3 is 0, 0, 0. So that's exactly what we want. Go ahead and set that. And there's one more thing we have to set. We have to set the player rigid body dot angular velocity, because there are two velocities that kind of come with the player rigid body. For now, we're just going to reset it back down to 0. As you'll find if you do research it a bit, that rigid bodies contain both a velocity and an angular velocity, and that both get updated when a rigid body is in a state of movement. But for now, let's go ahead and set the angular velocity to a vector3 of 0, so that the rigid body of the player is completely still on reset. Go ahead and Control S for that. And now the second collision that we want to detect, go ahead and do else if again. We'll say collider.gameObject.compareTag. We're going to look for the GameOver object. Open close brackets. And we actually want to do the exact same thing that we did in the win condition. We want to set the count to 0. We want to update the score text. And we want to reset the position of the rigid body and the velocity of the rigid body of the player. So instead of repeating code, let's go ahead and create a separate method, call it void, and let's call this reset game state. Open close parens, open close brackets. Let's go ahead and take all of this right here, edit and paste it. And so that we don't have to rewrite the code over and over again, and so that we have a reusable method, we'll go ahead and just call this method from both the win condition and the game over condition. Now we could do an else if and check whether or not the collider is a win or a game over object, and then just perform reset game state if it's either. But I'm going to keep it this way for now because in a future video, we might want to do different things if the object is a win or if the object is a game over. For instance, displaying on the screen whether or not the player had won or lost. But for our purposes for this video, we're going to go ahead and just reset the game state with the count of 0, updating the score text, and resetting the player position, velocity, and angular velocity. Now the other thing we wanted to do in resetting game state is we wanted to reactivate our gems, right? Because whenever we pick up a gem, we set its active flag to false, and then when we reset the game state, we want to reset all of them back to true. This is where our gems array comes in handy, because we have a listing of all the gems already that are placed on our game board, regardless of it's active or inactive. We can just set all of our gems back to an active state. So we'll go ahead and go into reset game state. We'll go right in the middle here, and we'll say for each gem, set active flag back to true, so that they appear back on our game board when the game resets. Now this will be our first instance of a for loop. For loops are something that you'll find constantly in all programming languages, and it just allows you as the programmer to perform a method over and over again without you having to write the same method over and over again. And you'll understand it a little bit better as we type it here. So the syntax goes for an open parens, the int I. So I is just an int object. We establish it to 0. And as long as the int I is less than the amount of gems, which is gems.length, this gives us the amount of gems. And every time we finish the loop, we're going to increment the int I. So we're going to say I++ to do that. Close parens. And open bracket, close bracket. So again, just going over this, we establish an integer of I, and we're going to do this for loop as many times as there is gems, and then we're going to increment I each time we go through the loop. And so for every gem, we're going to go ahead and set the active flag back to true. But how do we get each gem? Well, we're going to use the integer I to get each gem through the list. So we're going to say gems, and then open bracket, I, close bracket, and I'll explain this in just a second, dot game object dot set active to true. So what is this doing here? So because we're going through the list of gems, for each gem, we're going to set the active flag to true. So in the list of gems, we have gem 0, we have gem 1, we have gem 2, all the way up to gems length -1. So what do we have on our game board? We have 30. So the number of gems is 0 to 29, meaning we have 30 gems. So what this is saying here, for at least the first one, for gems number 0, we're going to set the active flag to true for that game object. Then we're going to go through the loop again. Gems number 1, which in this case is our second gem, set the active flag to true on that game object. And it's going to do that for every single gem in the list. And that's how we're going to go ahead and reset the flag on gems. Now, if this looks foreign to you or you're still a little confused on it, I highly encourage you to look into for loops a little bit more, because loops are a fundamental tool for us developers, especially in the code, not just on games, but in programming in general. For our purposes, this is all we're going to do with loops for now. Let's go ahead and Control S to save. And I think that's about it. So let's go ahead and test it in our game. Minimize our code. Press start. Or play, I should say. Go ahead and pick up a few gems. 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and try to finish this map here. I think we'll be able to do it. I've done this enough times now in our videos. Of course, the player of your game will want to pick up as many gems as they can. But for me to complete the map, we'll go ahead and do that. We'll hit the WinGem, and you can see that the game reset. Perfect. And now we'll go ahead and fall off the ledge to see a lost state. And you can see it returns back to the position with a velocity of 0. Perfect. Awesome. We'll go ahead and press play to stop there. So guys, we're almost to the end here of making this game. The next video that we're going to do is a pretty important one. We're going to play around with more of the UI components. As you guys could probably tell that when we press play one more time, as we pick up gems, we can see our score in the top right. Oops, I missed that one. See our score in the top right. But the second we lose or win, we do reset the game. But wait, our score is gone. We can't see a score screen. We can't be notified that we lost or we won. And we can't take a screenshot of it and brag to our friends the end score that we got. Go ahead and press play to stop here. So to fix that, we want to create a screen that tells the player whether they won or they lost and their final score so that they know how many gems they picked up along the way. So guys, as always, thank you so much for watching the video. If you're liking the series and you want to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and follow the channel. Hit that like button underneath the video. Leave us a comment if you have any concerns or questions or just want to say hi. And we will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching, guys.